But the but thing is like it should be potentially suspicious that as a security personnel we should see. So if you just go through the destination IP addresses over here that of the DNS server. So one of the thing is that everything is like kind of a normal. Looks like okay, 132.139 is something that there's a query for that 139 on your server. But what we see is that there was one query that was made to 8.8.8.8 over here. Okay, if you see over here 8.8.8. I hope this is visible. Okay, so actually this is something kind of a potentially suspicious, because if let's say we have kind of done a PCAP capture, let's say for 1 hour, or let's say for 3 hours, and what we are seeing is that all the DNS resolving is via this 139 IP address. But suddenly we see that okay, the DNS resolver has changed to 8.8.8.8. So this actually signifies that there is some kind of process that is kind of, let's say that is some kind of process that is kind of running. Okay, that is something running, which is kind of, so here the source traffic, here the source of the source IP address is actually 139. 139 is the source IP address of the source computer, and one of the DNS server is 42.2, because we are making a query to 42.2. So that's one thing. Okay, and now what we are saying is that 42.2 is something like the internal DNS server, which has been kind of configured to kind of resolve your DNS query. But then we suddenly see that the source IP address is kind of using 8.8.8.8 as the DNS server to resolve the IP address to get the IP address of google.com. So that is indeed malicious. So even indeed potentially malicious. Okay, that's a correct term to say. So thing is that let's say we did a packet capture for let's say 3 or let's say 1 day, and we saw that okay, for the full day, this IP address, which was the source IP address is 139, was trying to kind of resolve the DNS query from 42.2. But suddenly we see that okay, it is trying to resolve the IP address DNS. It is trying to reach out to DNS server 8.8.8.8. We know that there is something kind of potentially malicious. Okay, because 139, maybe there is something some process that is running which is not depending on the local DNS server, which is 42.2 to resolve the IP address of a domain, but it is depending on the Google public DNS server, which is 8.8.8.8, and it is trying to kind of get the IP address of google.com. Okay, so this is one of the things which I was trying to kind of ask you guys, like what would be the potentially not suspicious but potentially suspicious entry over here. So that's the correct answer, is that it is 8.8.8.8 that this source IP address is trying to reach out to resolve the DNS query, okay, for google.com. So that's one thing which is indeed kind of potentially malicious. Okay, overall you guys have already told the correct answer for most of them, and now I think it's now the rest ones are like the rest questions are basically for the HTTP part, which I will be kind of discussing later once this DNS part is done. Okay, so now let's come back from this thing to our DNS part, DNS discussion. So let me just go to that. So where were we? So so let me just quickly turn off my fan, guys. It has a timer of 1 hour. So let me just quickly turn off my fan. Give me 1 second. Okay, so now let's quickly continue our discussion back to our topic that we are discussing. So thing is that our discussion was basically on kind of understanding. So I just need to check I'm audible. Okay, so our discussion was basically into kind of doing the DNS discovery check. So let's assume like I'm an attacker. I want to kind of attack on google.com. So what I will do is that I will try to expand my attack surface area. So rather than just kind of figuring out what might be the vulnerability in google.com, I will try to figure out what are the subdomains like mail.google.com, or let's say I'll try to find the subdomains of google.com, and we'll try to see if any of that subdomains what are their IP address, and let's hope like okay, one of them is like not properly configured. So how I can kind of, as an attacker, I can kind of get all those info. So the first way I would do that is doing the passive DNS lookup and OS init. Okay. So what I mean by OS, yeah, go on.
So actually, I have a question here. So, for example, the companies like Facebook, Google, they may be using like proxy servers to hide the real IP address of the servers that are
Yes.
behind. So we will not be able to see the actual IP. So is there some way we can find the real IP address that we are not able to see as we are not able to
Okay.
figure out?
The real IP address maybe, yeah. One of the thing can be like, let's say they are utilizing, let's say, what to say, CDN, content delivery network, to kind of uh, so let's say to um, to serve you the web page. So that's one thing. So what will happen is that one of the thing can be that, let's say you got the CDN IP address. So at an attacker, so even though like you have not got the actual IP address of facebook.com, um, what you can do is that maybe there would be some kind of, like, we have seen there had been kind of there like lot of attacks where even the CDN, where even the CDN providers servers are kind of like compromised, so they are not properly configured, and the attackers were able to, let's say, were able to kind of get a hold of the CDN server, for an example. Okay, so what will happen is that case, once the attacker, so let's say attacker is has got hold of the CDN server. So in that CDN server, since that CDN server was, let's say, was trying to kind of serve the data of Facebook.com. So because we are now inside that CDN server, so from there we can kind of look at the log entries, and maybe we can figure out like, okay, what's the actual IP address of Facebook.com, or what are the actual assets from where the CDN server is trying to kind of pull out the content, and it is trying to kind of serve that to you guys. Okay, so that's, I think, one of the tricky way, but it is kind of one of the hard way, but it's actually possible, where the attacker is able to somehow kind of, how to say, um, directly kind of compromise the CDN server itself and try to figure out the actual like kind of IP addresses behind that CDN server. And most of the cases is that maybe a lot of services of, let's say, Facebook.com are not behind CDN, for example. Okay, in that case, maybe when we do the NS lookup or what, so let's say we have one of the domain, let's say videosgoogle.com. So let's say this is not behind CDN, for an example. Okay. So in that case, what we will do is that we will be able to kind of get the actual IP address of the server of google.com, rather than getting the IP address of CDN. We got the actual IP address of google.com. So that would be kind of one of the way. So that's the reason why we kind of figure out what are the subdomains and what are the different IP address of google.com, or let's say of any other IP address. So there are three ways actually to kind of figure that out. So one of the thing is that definitely the OS init, okay, which is like open source intelligence. So maybe what we do is that, let's say you want to figure out the actual IP address of facebook.com. So what you do is that you kind of try to kind of do a lot of like searches on let's say virus.com. Okay, virus.com, or you kind of try to visit multiple blogs or articles, for an example. So from there, what you can do is that you can kind of, let's say, you can kind of, let's say, figure out the IP addresses. Okay, IP addresses of the URLs that you are trying to figure out from there. So even without kind of making any kind of DNS query to the actual website, maybe you can kind of figure out the IP addresses, or let's say the subdomains of that website, just by doing the open source intelligence. Okay, via visiting different kind of websites like bachelor.com, or let's say different other blogs or articles. Okay, that's one thing. So maybe like there, like suppose like there are different kind of blogs from facebook.com. So maybe in one of the blog, what you can figure out, like they are talking about, let's say, one of the search one of the subdomain like research.facebook.com. So from there you can figure out, okay, that is one of the valid domains of research.facebook. So there are multiple other ways, but I'll be sticking to, I will not be expanding a lot, because at